All right, so this week we begin the third book of the Torah, the book of VaYikra or Leviticus, as it's known in English. Um, and of course, it's the book that focuses mostly on the laws of sacrifices, what the different sacrifices are, and how they are supposed to be offered and by whom they are offered, and with a little bit of a detour. Or there's also laws besides the sacrifices. There's also laws of ritual purity, which are related to sacrifices, because if one becomes impure, the purification process involves bringing a sacrifice. And there's a little detour in the middle of the book, which happens to be around the middle of the Torah, right? The middle of the third of the five books is the middle of the Torah, is the what's known as the holiness code. So we'll get there when we get to the portion Kedoshim to talk about these religious precepts. By following them, we attain a sense of holiness. So there's the sacrificial system, the purification system, which is all about how to be a holy person and a holy society. So I want to spend most of our time today below the line, beginning on page 585. And we'll start with the bracha, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, shekidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Because the below the line focuses on an introduction to this book and how we as moderns can relate to something so primitive as a sacrificial system, right? So in other words, if any religious society were to suggest today that a way for us to feel spiritual would be to slaughter an animal, I think that whoever would offer that would be committed to a mental health institution, and certainly there would not be it would not be considered a credible option today. But 3,000 years ago, this was the only option. This is what, in other words, people had not thought of a different option on how to worship God. It was instinctive to offer something of ourselves to God, if not offering human beings to God too, because there was that practice as well in the ancient Near East. So, and it happened also in the history of Israel, in the later books of the Bible, where kings became corrupt and brought idol worship into the temple. There were those kings that even mandated child sacrifice, which happened in one of the valleys on one side of the old city, known as the Valley of Hinnom, Gay Hinnom, which then became the precursor for the name of the Jewish idea of the netherworld, the place we go if we had not repented of our sins. It's Gehinnom, for the Valley of Hinnom, from where the child sacrifices were. Okay, so let's look at the introduction. I just want to look at a few paragraphs, because the introduction on the bottom of 585 in Eitz Chaim goes on to 586 to take up the whole page. So I don't want to read all of it. I just want to focus on a couple parts of it. So first, the first couple of paragraphs. Leviticus is a difficult book for a modern person to read with reverence and appreciation. Its main subject matter, animal offerings and ritual impurity, seems remote from contemporary concerns, right? The whole sense also, not just about animal sacrifice, but ritual purity is also bizarre. There isn't, it isn't part of modern society to think that in terms, there's certainly thinking in terms of right and wrong, but not in terms of our bodies becoming impure, like the wrong making us impure. There isn't that sense to modern religious life. We have remnants of this, of course, with when we wash our hands symbolically before saying hamotzi, right? And I say symbolically because we don't have to do it with soap and water, just a little bit of water on both hands to symbolically remind us of becoming pure as we're about to engage in this holy meal. And then there's this the even more symbolic purification after departing a cemetery, with also washing our hands with a little bit of water, because that in no way is any kind of purification that was required when coming into contact with the dead. So this whole concept of ritual purity and purification is really, and also in the non-Orthodox world, married Jewish women don't go to the mikveh. In the Orthodox world, it is something that married women do once a month. So in the non-Orthodox world, we're also not connected to that at all. So yet almost, I'm going on with the commentary, yet almost half of the 613 commandments of the Torah are found in this book, the text with which young children traditionally began their Jewish education. And that's a comment for another time about why traditionally in the Orthodox world, children begin learning Torah right here in VaYikra, whereas in most community Jewish day schools, they begin learning with Lech Lecha, the portion from Genesis where God speaks to Abraham to go to the land of Israel. So my kids, and certainly in day schools, non-Orthodox day schools across the country, in elementary school, they're learning the portions in Genesis, not Leviticus. Our concern in reading Leviticus should be more than historical. That is, this is what our ancestors used to believe and practice. It should be an effort to understand the religious needs that were met by these practices in ancient times, needs that we still confront today, and the religious ideas that were taught in the process, right? So we need to understand, we need to understand the relevancy of this book rather than just simply read it as history coming to life. Jules, do you have a question? Because you're unmuted. No, you're just testing. Okay, no problem. The modern temper tends to discount prescribed ritual in favor of spontaneous religious expression. So this is something I want to talk about for a moment, and I'll read the rest of the paragraph in a minute. A lot of everything about this book is prescribed. In other words, here are the sacrifices that are to be offered at what time and for what reason. And here is what to do in case you become ritually impure. And here is the ritual that goes with it, right? So there's nothing, well, the only spontaneous thing is an offering of well-being, right? So you might in the moment you feel like you want to bring a sacrifice. Well, there's no spontaneity around it. In other words, let's say you're in your village in northern Israel and the mood strikes you to offer a sacrifice to God for whatever good thing has just happened in your life. Well, you can't do it right there. You would have to then allow that spontaneity to carry you by picking an animal to choose to offer to God as this sacrifice of well-being, and then make the journey to Jerusalem, to the temple, to offer and then go through the purification process in order to then bring that animal. So there's nothing spontaneous in the moment of feeling spontaneous about wanting to bring a sacrifice of well-being. Whereas in modern times today, there's more of a sense of spontaneity in our religious practice, right? In other words, you can recite the Shehecheyanu in a moment in a life cycle moment that would feel spontaneous, or you could write a prayer on your own to respond to whatever is going on in your life, both good and bad, right? Rabbi Naomi Levy, for example, my classmate from rabbinical school and scholar and author in the conservative movement, is an expert on spontaneous prayers, right? There's a book she wrote, which of course I'm not going to be able to find on my shelf right now, but of prayers, which goes against the whole idea of spontaneity. In other words, she wrote prayers spontaneously about different moments in life that we might have, that in case we feel lacking poetically, to be able to recite a prayer, she has this book of prayers to help respond in that moment. So the prayer book, Naomi Levy's book, our own internal feelings welling forth are opportunities for us to respond spontaneously, spiritually in the moment, right? Whereas as VaYikra describes, there's no such thing to respond spontaneously, and in fact, the Nadav and Avihu, who did respond spontaneously in the portion Shmini, are struck down by God for that act, right? So spontaneity not only is discouraged, but seems to be prevented. Everything has its place. All right, so that could be another challenge for us moderns to feel connected to this book, where the prayer book, even though it's all written down, that's the irony of the prayer book. We know from the rabbis that we can respond. Prayer can be spontaneous, but the rabbis knew that not everybody would be able to write a prayer in the moment. So they wrote prayers for us as suggestions. They seem not to be suggestions, but rather what needs to be said. But really, they are just suggestions as long as we follow the framework that the rabbis set down for us. If we're going to say the Amida, then they should be these 19 prayers. But if you feel spontaneous in the moment about one of those prayers, well, use that prayer as an outline and add to it if you want to. We're more than able to do that, and we fulfill the commandment of prayer by adding our own thoughts to the prayers. All right, so spontaneity is part of the Jewish prayer system now, where it was not part of the sacrificial system. So the commentary goes on, yet something in the human soul responds to ritual, whether it be the formality of a traditional wedding or the rituals of a sporting event or a public meeting. There is something comforting about the familiar, the recognizable, the predictable. There's something deeply moving about performing a rite that is older than we are, one that goes back beyond the time of our parents and grandparents. At crucial times, it's important for us to know that we're doing it right. So not in those spontaneous moments, but perhaps on Shabbat, or perhaps even more what the commentary might be alluding to for life cycle moments, weddings or funerals, the opposite of opposite extremes of feeling of sadness and joy. It's good to know that there's a ritual that goes with it, so that the funerals, the Jewish funeral service, or the minyan that takes place at Shiva, or the prayers that happen under the chuppah, are all kind of elevate the moment in a way in which it adds more emotion to the moment as well, and it helps channel our feelings in a particular way, right? And a moment of chaos, right? Ultimate joy is chaotic. Ultimate grief is chaotic. To have prayers to be to recite helps reduce the chaos and provide stability. And that's what the sacrifices did. That's what prayers do, provide stability in a moment that could be chaotic, both good or bad. So the commentary goes on. There is power in the knowledge that we're doing what generations of people before us have done in similar situations, something that other people in other places are doing at the same time in the same way. So some of us might feel added sense of emotion by knowing, this Jewish couple under the chuppah today, this is what couples did under the chuppah for hundreds and hundreds of years. So there's power in the history in the making of that ritual moment, right? And that we are burying the dead in the same way that we have been burying the dead for 2,000 years as well. So there's power in that. It's a deeply personal moment, both funeral and wedding, deeply personal for those involved. But by having community there, by having prayers there, it adds to that. Like what the traditional words of comfort for a mourner: Hamakom yinachem etchem b'toch shar avalei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. So what do we say to a mourner? We're not saying we're really sorry for your loss, or may so-and-so's memory be for a blessing. We're saying, the traditional words are, may God comfort you among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem. What does that mean? How is somebody who's mourning so-and-so feel comforted by knowing that we're among the mourners of Zion and Jerusalem? Well, we're all mourners. And we've all been mourning, and we continue to mourn the destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. And that this loss, this personal loss, is just added to the grief of us all being mourners. And that the mourner should understand that, yes, this personal moment is happening, but we're all still in the process of being mourners. So that's part of this ritual that puts the moment in this historical context. And the commentary goes on, and rituals, including prescribed prayers, tell us what to do and say at times when we cannot rely on our own powers of inspiration to know what to do or say. I always am envious of my non-Jewish clergy partners who can recite a prayer spontaneously, and I'm just not trained in doing that. So when our only interfaith clergy met over a meal, the non-Jewish clergy could, just like that, come up with a prayer welcoming everybody to the meal and reciting a prayer about how the upcoming session should move us and bring us closer, that kind of thing, where we just don't take classes in that in rabbinical school on how to recite a prayer spontaneously like that. So I always feel out of place and never volunteer to recite a prayer. Like, all I have at a meal is to say hamotzi. And there's nothing spontaneous about saying hamotzi, and there's nothing about the gathering of people that hamotzi responds to. So the commentary goes on. Ritual is a way of giving voice to ultimate values. Each of us needs a sense of holiness to navigate the relentless secularity of our lives. From Chancellor Ismar Shorsh. For the Israelites of biblical times, it must have been gratifying to know what to do when they wanted to approach God at crucial moments of their lives, in need or in gratitude. Right? So that's one way of understanding these the sacrificial system, and how it's a timeless need that we have to respond to moments in our life. So now I want to turn to the next page, 586, and look at a couple more paragraphs that begin on the left column with Maimonides believed. So on the left-hand side of 586, Maimonides believed that God did not savor this manner of worship, lest people assume that they were feeding God, who would go hungry without their gifts. Right? So here's a problem then that our commentary is responding to by saying, okay, how is it an acceptable thing for a Jew to bring a sacrifice? In other words, how is it theologically acceptable to understand that God wants or needs animals to be offered to God? Right? What kind of God is it that mandates sacrifice, animals being slaughtered for God's purposes, right? So that's why. So so again, Maimonides, who lived 1,000 years after the temple was destroyed, developed a system of Jewish thought that is still studied today. His Guide to the Perplexed is a standard in texts over the centuries of understanding the evolution of Jewish thought, right? So since he lived 1,000 years after the temple was destroyed, that's a significant amount of time not to have sacrifices as part of Jewish worship, and how Judaism evolved through prayer and thought, right? So he said, God did not savor this manner of worship, lest people assume that they were feeding God, who would go hungry without their gifts. So Maimonides understood that the Jewish system was an evolutionary system. Okay, he still maintained that yes, sacrifices should be offered, but he had to understand it in a way that makes sense rationally for his time. Bravenel, who lived a couple hundred years after, also suggests that God never intended to call for animal offerings. After the Israelites worshipped the golden calf, however, God recognized the inability of people to deal with a totally abstract notion of the divine, and at that point ordained the details of the sacrificial system. Just as God does not need our prayers, although we need to pray, God does not need our sacrifices, although we need to offer them to feel God's nearness. All right, so just like sacrifices, Bravenel is suggesting, it was a compromise after the golden calf, so too, I think we could apply this to eating meat. Why for human consumption are we allowed to eat meat? That's a compromise after the flood, right? To understand, God understood the human condition, that we have an instinct to kill. And so, okay, let's channel that in this way by allowing animals to be slaughtered and then cooked for human consumption. So instead, and that if we're allowed to do that, then maybe we won't murder each other to the extent that we were murdering each other before the flood came. The same thing, okay, we have a propensity to idol worship. We need God to be seen in a concrete way. That's why the golden calf happened. They just couldn't, the people couldn't think abstractly about God. So let's compromise and say, okay, you need to have something concrete to do. Here's the sacrificial system. So perhaps then that's a way to understand this as well. And that prayer might not be enough. Like we have the lulav and etrog on Sukkot. Maybe that is some concrete thing that we're doing. Eating matzah on Passover, eating dairy on Shavuot, challahs on Shabbat. So there's something, lighting candles before Shabbat. Concrete things that we're doing that bring the abstract ideas and values of Judaism and the holidays into a concrete form. So I think there's something to be said for that we need concrete rituals to be performing to help translate the abstract in a more accessible way. So it's an interesting idea that prayer isn't enough for us to feel close to God. We need to do concrete things to feel close to God. So that lighting candles on Friday night, it's one thing to bow at the end of Lachadodi to welcome in Shabbat, right? So that's a little bit of a concrete thing to do to an abstract idea of welcoming God, but lighting candles to welcome the Shabbat physically into our, to serve as this dividing line between the workday and now the Shabbat day, is a more powerful kind of ritual to perform to bring those abstract ideas to life. Okay, so that's the idea here about these rituals. Okay, that's what I wanted to share with this introduction today. Now I want to look at, we still have a bit of time. I want to look at the first two sentences of the portion and just especially highlight the Hebrew of verse 2. So, VaYikra el Moshe, I'm back on 585. VaYikra el Moshe. Notice that the aleph is printed smaller, and that's on purpose. There's an asterisk there to point out that in all Torah scrolls, that aleph is printed smaller. So it's up for midrash about why that aleph is smaller, but it just is. No matter what Torah scroll you open, the aleph of the word VaYikra is supposed to be written smaller. So God called to Moses, right? It's literally he called to Moses. So who's the he? Clearly it's God, and the English translation doesn't put the Lord in brackets. It should be in brackets because there's no noun. It's just he. It's just a pronoun there. Okay, so he called to Moses. He called to Moses. But so the English translation is misleading. It doesn't say God called to Moses. It says he called to Moses. Vaydaber Adonai elav, and God spoke to him. And God spoke to him, Me'ohel Moed Lemor, from the tent of meeting, saying. Okay, so the noun is put, so we're on Leviticus chapter 1, verse 1, or on page 585 in the Eitz Chaim, and I apologize for someone who just joined the class. I sent out an email to the regulars of Torah study this morning to say that we're starting at 10:30 because I have a meeting to go to, so I apologize, but it is being recorded so you can catch it from the beginning. He called to Moses, and God spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying. All right, so maybe the Adonai Yod Hei Vav Hei, it would have been better. In other words, if my 8th grade grammar teacher, if I had written this sentence this way, my 8th grade grammar teacher would have put an X through the sentence and said Adonai, the noun should have been at the beginning of the sentence. You don't you put the noun first and then pronouns come later because you then know what you're talking about. So it should be VaYikra Adonai el Moshe, Vaydaber elav, Me'ohel Moed Lemor. That would have been better grammatically. God spoke to Moses, and God called to Moses, and he spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying. Okay, so that would have been a better constructed sentence, but it's just why it's written this way, not sure. So verse 2, Daber el bnei Yisrael, speak to the people of Israel, ve'amarta aleihem, and you should say to them, and this sentence is what I want to talk about for a little bit. Adam ki yakriv mikem korban ladonai, min habehema, min habakar, umin atzon takrivu et korbanchem. So the English is going to be misleading. I'm going to read what it says here in 587. When any of you presents an offering of cattle to the Lord, he shall choose his offering from the herd or from the flock. Okay, so from the English, it's talking to one person from the community, so meaning everybody. So when any of you, means all of you, present an offering of cattle to God, you shall choose your offering from the herd or from the flock. Okay, so in the English, it makes sense how it's written here. This is a proceeding for individual offerings to God. The Hebrew is not so clear. Okay, from the Hebrew, it is when a person, so it's a person, not not ish or isha, not a man or a woman, but Adam is seen as a generic way in Hebrew to refer to a person. So as we know, Hebrew is a gender-based language. So this is the best way in the gender-based language to refer to an anonymous person as opposed to a man or a woman. So when a person from among you offers an offering, but even more literally, comes close with a closeness. And my intention behind that is that an offering, the word for offering or sacrifice in Hebrew is from the word karov, to come close, or lekarev, to get close, or a relative, like a cousin, a brother or a sister, is called a karov. So that root kuf resh bet, which means close, is a referent, is used in this context of what the point of the sacrifice is. So for the Hebrew word helps us define what a sacrifice is. It's called in Hebrew a korban because the sacrifice itself helps us get closer. Right? So it's called, the sacrifice is a get close. I'm doing a get close today. I'm offering a sacrifice. I'm doing a get close. So in other words, I want to offer this animal. I'm doing that because I want to get close to God. Okay, so that's the point here. So when a person offers a sacrifice, we just need to keep in mind that the Hebrew word korban, which means sacrifice, the idea behind the sacrifice is not giving up what the word sacrifice means, but rather getting close. So when a person among you offers to God from the cattle or from the flock or from the animals, right? So it's behema, bakar, or tzon. So it's cattle or herd or flock. So when a person, takrivu, you, plural, should offer your plural sacrifices. Okay, so the English leaves out the discrepancy between the singular, that it starts with a person, and ends with the plural. So when a person among you offers from the animals to God, you, plural, offer your sacrifices, plural. So that leaves it open to discussion as to why the sentence is transitioning from singular to plural, whereas the English translation fixes it and leaves out the problem. So let's look below the line and see what it says. So when any of you presents an offering, literally, when a man presents an offering, may your offerings be those like those of Adam. So Adam is the generic human being. I'm translating it as human being as opposed to man. But the Midrash is saying that, this is relating to Adam as in Adam and Eve. So may your offerings be like those of Adam, belonging to you and not stolen, offered solely to express your love of God and not to impress your neighbors. So, in other words, we can read the Hebrew, when you offer, it should be like Adam. So Adam wasn't, there was no phrase keeping up with the Joneses in Adam's time, because there were no other Joneses around. There was only Adam and Eve. So there was no sense in their head of peer pressure or needing to keep up with anybody else. So in other words, like when we do things publicly, we might feel like if you go to a fundraising event, often they have an auction there or ask at the fundraising event to raise money. So if they start calling people out by name, then everybody's going to feel, well, they have to keep up and to give the same amount, if not more, than so-and-so just gave, right? So you're feeling an obligation, a community obligation, a reputation obligation to keep up in that way, as opposed to what a sacrifice is supposed to be, pure intention to God. That you're not doing it to show to your friend, oh, look at my donation that I gave today. My name's on the building. How about you? Right? So you're giving the sacrifice, you're giving the donation for your own good, to show off, maybe even to encourage other people to give, but it's not the original intention of a sacrifice is pure getting closer to God. Okay, so now we go on. The word for offering, korban, comes from the Hebrew root kuf resh bet, meaning to bring close or to come close. When we give a gift to someone we feel close to, we feel even closer for having given the gift. The korban both reflects and reinforces the Israelites' bond to God. The point of the sacrifice is not to feed or to bribe God, but to come close to God. Okay, so just saying again, the idea of what an offering, what a sacrifice is, it's all about getting close to God. Now, this is where the next paragraph talks about this transition in the Hebrew, which we didn't see in the English translation, about why it's singular at the beginning of the verse and it switches to plural at the end. So the opening words of the Hebrew text are singular, but the Torah soon shifts to plural, right? When a person offers, you, plural, your plural sacrifices, right? This reflects the essence of the religious experience. A Hasidic master taught that we enter the sanctuary as individuals, but the experience of worship leads us to transcend our separateness and become part of the community. So this is an important point that I wanted to share. The idea of how the sacrifice starts as a very personal, deeply personal experience, right? We feel the need to do it, whether it's a sacrifice of well-being or any other circumstance where we're commanded to bring a sacrifice. This is something deeply personal. But when we're bringing it, we realize we're not alone in bringing it, right? We have a Kohen there who's going to be offering it for us. So at least there's one other person. And then there's a community of other people who are also in line to bring their sacrifices too. So we're not alone in performing it. We're not alone in bringing it as well. Everybody's bringing it. This happens in prayer as well. Whether it's a deeply personal reason to pray, God forbid a funeral, or for celebrating a wedding, deeply personal, but you're not doing it alone. You have the community to celebrate with you, rest of your family, other friends. The community of Israel is celebrating and mourning with you, so that the personal becomes then communal. And that's an interesting element and idea of Judaism, that Judaism is at its core a community religion. It's a religion that responds to individual needs in community. Right? So we can pray, we can fulfill the mitzvah to pray 3 times a day all by ourselves, but we have to leave things out when we pray. Unless we're with a minyan, when we fully then are able to recite everything in the service. Right? So yes, we can do things as individuals, but we can't ideally do them unless we're in community. So even with talking about the sacrificial system that might seem archaic, there are elements about it that transcend time and place and reflect basic human spiritual needs. So any questions or comments? So I want to stop here for today. Thank you all for being here, and I'm glad that most of you got the message that I sent out about starting at 10:30 today instead of 11 o'clock. We're back to the regular time next week, and I apologize for changing the time and not having everybody be able to know that in a timely manner. But we're back to 11 o'clock next Wednesday. So have a good rest of the day, everybody. Take care.